And tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 9:30 on Friday the 3rd of November. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver. Coming up today.
UK in turmoil. Storm Kieran leaves thousands without power and 80 flood warnings across the country. Our reporter Jeff Moody is in Teignmouth.
Yes, well, the storm is over for now, but we are hearing of the clean-up operation, which will be taking place throughout the day. I'll be reporting live from Teignmouth throughout the day.
Escape from Gaza. 92 Britons are expected to cross the border to Egypt today as the IDF continues its ground operations around Gaza City. Our security editor Mark White will be here with the latest from southern Israel.
And is Remembrance Day doomed? Tens of thousands of pro-Palestine demonstrators are planning to take to the streets of London on Armistice Day, Saturday, November the 11th. Should this be allowed?
Must we talk about AI? Well, at the end of the AI summit, Rishi Sunak rushed down to meet the world's richest man in Lancaster House and discuss the future possibilities of this remarkable technology.
Yes, and we're going to be speaking to Security Minister Tom Tugendhat in just a little moment. We'll be putting lots of those points to him today. Please do email us, gbviews@gbnews.com, with all of your thoughts, whatever they are. But first, let's get your headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Israeli military says it's surrounded Gaza City, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying forces are at the height of the battle. Further advances in the offensive against Hamas look set to involve urban warfare against an enemy fighting back with hit-and-run attacks from underground tunnels. Israel's assault is complicated by the humanitarian situation and the more than 240 hostages still held by the terrorist group. That'll be the focus of Antony Blinken's visit to the region. The US Secretary of State is back in Tel Aviv, where he's expected to press Mr. Netanyahu to agree to a humanitarian pause in fighting. GB News understands up to 100 British nationals trapped in Gaza have been approved to travel through the Rafah crossing into Egypt today. The border is expected to open again for limited evacuations. Dozens of flood warnings remain in place across the country after the damage and disruption of Storm Ciarán. Almost 90 flood warnings are in effect, with 235 flood alerts. Parts of eastern Scotland and England are being warned to expect heavy rain and strong winds today and into Saturday. Nearly 150,000 homes were left without power on Thursday, with around 11,000 still affected. Meanwhile, all schools on Jersey remain closed, with people urged to stay at home. A woman has appeared in an Australian court charged with the murder of 3 elderly people who are suspected to have died after eating poisonous mushrooms. Erin Patterson is alleged to have hosted a lunch in July at her home in a small rural town in the state of Victoria. Police believe she served beef Wellington, which may have contained death cap mushrooms. Her ex-husband, who was present at the lunch, survived. However, his mother, father and aunt all died in hospital. She's been charged with 3 counts of murder and 5 of attempted murder. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Thank you and very good morning to you. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News. Now, Storm Ciarán has swept across the British Isles and the Channel Islands, leaving roofs torn off homes and cars smashed by, quote, golf ball-sized hailstones.
Yes, gusts of up to 100 miles per hour were recorded yesterday. Almost 20,000 homes and businesses across the UK went without power at lunchtime.
Well, the Met Office says it will continue to impact Scotland and parts of northern England, and the damage will be long-lasting.
Yes, so let's go live now to Jeff Moody, who's in Teignmouth. Jeff, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It looks like the calm after the storm where you are.
What a difference a day makes, eh? Just have a look at that sea. It's absolutely beautiful today. Gorgeous sunshine. A total and utter contrast to yesterday. Well, Storm Ciarán has now moved away. It's up in the North Sea somewhere. It's now the clean-up operation. You can see here that people are out in force cleaning up the debris. Just to give you an idea of the sort of debris I'm talking about, you can see what this wall has done. Apologies if you're on the radio. Basically, the waves have totally knocked this wall over, and the slabs and the paving stones too. And if we walk up this way a little bit more, you can see quite substantial damage over here where these seatings are, and that gives you some idea of the force of those waves. Still plenty of flood warnings in place, 88 flood warnings along the south coast, and 220 flood alerts. They're dotted all over the country, so it's not over yet, but you can see on the pier the damage there, quite considerable damage with the high wind and waves. So yes, still some flood alerts in place, but the worst of it was in Jersey and in parts of Cornwall. But basically, I think all in all, we've come out of it quite well. Some damage to people's properties, some damage to people's roofs, some damage to public spaces. But so far, fingers crossed, we're not hearing of anything more serious. It could have been a lot worse.
No, certainly, and I suppose a knocked-down wall is much, much preferable to any loss of life, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but I don't believe we have heard any reports of.
No, we haven't at all, which is very good, certainly compared to the storm a couple of weeks ago. Yes, we haven't heard of any reports of... one man had hypothermia where he got stuck in his car. He tried to drive over a flooded road and the car broke down and he was stranded for a good period of time and he had hypothermia. But so far, that's all we're hearing. So yes, good news.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jeff Moody there, live from the Devon coastline. And luckily, as we just said, no lives lost, but quite a lot of damage there in Teignmouth. Anyway, Israel says its forces have completed the encirclement of Gaza City as it continues to strike Hamas militants in populated areas, with a spokesman calling it another significant stage in this war.
Yes, well, meanwhile, in the south, civilians have continued to pass through the Rafah crossing in Egypt, with 92 Britons expected to cross across the crossing today as Israel surrounds Gaza City, of course.
Well, we'll be speaking to the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, in just one moment, but we are joined in the studio by Conservative MP and fellow GB News presenter, Philip Davies. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Lots of British nationals trapped in Gaza. We have seen there's been the go-ahead for them to leave. When will this start? Do you have any insight?
No, I don't. I'm sure Tom will be in a better position to comment than me. But obviously, it's good news that people are actually being allowed out that were trapped in Gaza, and obviously that British nationals are. I think Qatar have played quite an important role in brokering this kind of agreement, which sort of is part of their sort of growing influence on the diplomatic world stage that this crisis has brought about. So, yeah, that's good news. Hopefully more and more innocent people will be able to get out of what the horrific situation that's going on in Gaza.
And it is fascinating because so often in this conversation we keep hearing about Gaza and the problems there and that Israel is almost entirely to blame for that. But of course, the Rafah crossing is with Egypt. Egypt has decided to keep that crossing closed for weeks and weeks and weeks, despite what's going on in Gaza. Should we not be focused a bit more on President Sisi and his decisions that he's been making? Is this not, to some extent, a greater Egyptian problem than Israeli one?
Yeah, I think there should be a lot more focus on Egypt and their role in this. But of course, look, the Egyptians, everybody acts in their own national interest. And of course, you know, the question people should ask is, well, why have Egypt so reluctant to open this crossing? And of course, the reason why Egypt are so reluctant to open the crossing is because they fear that some of the Hamas terrorists will use the opportunity to get over the border rather than be civilians. It'll be an opportunity for the terrorists to get out into Egypt, which is the last thing that they want. And they fear a lot of the organised crime that often comes along with that. So, you know, yes, I mean, in a humanitarian situation, you need everybody doing their bit to try and help people out. But, you know, you've also got to respect the fact that the Egyptians are looking after their own national interests, and you can understand their reluctance to open up something which may be abused by Hamas terrorists who then leave the civilians in Gaza.
Well, Philip, just stay there for a moment because we do now have the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, who joins us live from central London, live from the Home Office, I believe. Tom, first of all, this has taken a long, long time to get this Rafah crossing opened. I suppose it's a welcome move that it is open, but why has it taken 3 weeks?
Well, look, it's really a very complicated crossing to open for exactly the reasons that Philip was talking about there, which is that Egypt and Israel both need to agree, and both sides are, of course, concerned about the possible departure of individuals who wouldn't be approved for travel, and that's a matter of concern for everybody. What we've done, what the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary and many of us have been doing is speaking to colleagues and partners in the region and in organisations that can help open the Rafah crossing to look after British people, because, you know, the prime aim of the British government is the protection of the British people, and that's what we're working on.
Tom, I'd like to ask you about potential protests over Remembrance Weekend, particularly on Armistice Day on Saturday, the 11th of November. Huge amount of concern over potential disruption due to pro-Palestine marches. I understand that you have actually written to the Mayor of London, the Met Police, Westminster Council, asking that these protests be banned, the pro-Palestine protests be banned from the area on that day. Your colleague Henry Smith, he says that the military should be involved if needed. What do you say to that?
Well, the military will be involved, of course, because many military people will be marching, will be on duty in bands or in other roles. And many of us, the old and bold, as it's called, and getting older by the day, certainly will be around. Because this is a moment when many of us will be getting together and standing with friends who we fought side by side with. And now we'll be remembering those friends who didn't make it home. And so it's a day of great pride for a lot of us, but it's also a day of grief. So I hope my concerns are registered, and I know that Chris Philp and the Home Secretary and others have also raised concerns, and it's an important moment for us all as a country, and, you know, for many of us. The cenotaph is sacred ground, so let's remember that.
I meant in terms of policing the protests, if there is disruption. Do you have faith that the police will manage this in an appropriate way?
Look, I hope that the police will make any requests that they need for any extra support that they want from whoever they need it. You know, at times like this, it's not unusual for other police forces to support the Met. It's a big day. There's a lot of pressure on them. But this is really a policing event. It's not a military event in that sense. It's not. It's an event for the military, but the security is best provided really by the police. So I hope the Met will ask for the resources they need.
What do you say to those who say that British servicemen and women who fought in various wars have fought for the very freedoms that are now exercised by people who may want to say things that might be viewed as distasteful, that might be viewed as inappropriate? But after all, it was the people that we honour this weekend who fought for their right to do so.
Well, you're absolutely right, Tom. I mean, you know, those of us who were lucky enough to wear the Queen's uniform, or now the King's uniform, served in order to protect the freedoms that we enjoy, and those are freedoms under the law, let's not forget. And so what we need to do is to make sure that everybody is exercising their freedoms, and freedom of speech is one of those, in order to be able to enjoy, you know, what's wonderful about living in the United Kingdom, what's wonderful about being British. And I think we can do that, and I think the policing does do that. What it does is it protects individual rights to freedom of speech and protest, but it also protects the rights of others to be quiet and to remember and to have that moment of grief that we share.
So, Tom, just to clarify, you don't believe the protests should be banned altogether on Armistice Day, but that they should be moved elsewhere and made sure that they don't interrupt or disrupt military remembrance?
So, look, I think the priority has to be to allow people to have that moment of grief, that moment of national mourning that we share together on the 11th of November at 11 o'clock, and, of course, on Remembrance Sunday as well. And I think that's absolutely where the focus should be. Of course, there are rights to protest at other times. Of course, it's right that people should express their views freely. But what's also right is that others have the right to come together and to be quiet and to be still for those 2 minutes which really unite us as a country and remind us of the huge sacrifices paid by so many.
Now, of course, something that was crucial to the war effort 70 years ago was Bletchley Park. And over the last 2 days, we've seen the most monumental summit of world leaders representing countries from the United States to China coming together in the United Kingdom and agreeing some foundational work on a global system of AI regulation. But it all ended in a curious way last night as we dashed down to Lancaster House, where the Prime Minister interviewed the richest man in the world. Why did Rishi Sunak sit down with Elon Musk last night?
So Elon is one of those remarkable people in the world who has genuinely transformed two industries. One is the electrical vehicle industry and the other is the rocketing industry, and is now involved in artificial intelligence. So I think the Prime Minister was doing absolutely the right thing, and something that, frankly, he's pretty uniquely qualified to do amongst world leaders, which is to prepare not only our country, but countries around the world for this global revolution that artificial intelligence will bring. I mean, Tom, you know that there are even now people working on ways of having targeted medicines to treat your cancer and not mine or to treat, the way that you might need muscle regeneration or whatever. And there are also different ways in which people are trying to use AI to improve education. In my patch, there's a fantastic school called Hillview that uses the arts and music to teach people maths and English. And there are any number of different individual ways we learn better. Well, artificial intelligence will make that even more accessible, even more possible. So having Rishi and Elon talking together about the possibilities and the hopes and for the future, I think is fantastic and demonstrates that this event in Bletchley is going to be one of the things that the government is remembered for, not in 5 or 10 years' time, but in 20 or 50.
Tom, it was a little bit deferential, wasn't it? It was a bit of a love-in. He said, "You're known for being such a brilliant innovator and technologist, and it's been a huge privilege and pleasure to have you here." This is one of Rishi Sunak's icons, isn't it?
Guys, look, you're polite to your interviewers, aren't you? I mean, when you're interviewing people, you're very often courteous to them. It shouldn't be surprising that the Prime Minister's courteous to Elon Musk. And yeah, I mean, he's an inspirational guy in many ways for many people. I mean, he certainly raises public opinion in various different ways. But what he's done is he's transformed 2 major industries. That's a remarkable achievement, and he's done so, and now is approaching artificial intelligence in a way that is open and is engaged, and that is looking for the ways that we protect ourselves as well as we open up the opportunities. And I think what Rishi's done with the AI Safety Summit, I think what the Prime Minister's doing is making sure that Britain is front and centre the regulations of the safety script, if you like, that will keep us all safe, and getting Elon to help, but also getting people like Mustafa Suleyman and Demis Hassabis, and of course the people who've actually brought this together, Matt Clifford and Ian Hogarth, is a fantastic achievement. We're demonstrating that Britain is not just one of the world's great AI countries, and it really is. We're up there with the United States and China as the world's greatest AI powers, but we're also setting the rules for the future and demonstrating that we're ready to set the agenda for others to follow.
Now, it was remarkable to see Ian Hogarth last night chatting with will.i.am in the audience of the conversation between the Prime Minister and Elon Musk. But I do wonder, that conversation did start looking to the very long term, did start talking about things such as a universal high income, a world where no one has to work. Is this getting a bit too highfalutin for what the Prime Minister might be better fixed on, which is the issues that matter in the here and now rather than in 50 or 100 years' time?
I think one of the things that nobody will ever say about the Prime Minister is that he doesn't do the detail on the here and now. He really, really does. He's a guy who really puts the work in today. And so I think it's an amazing skill to be able to put in the work on today, on whatever we need for today's economy, for today's healthcare, for today's security, and also to have a vision for the future. And I think having that balance is incredibly important. What the Prime Minister's doing with Elon, but also, as you rightly put it, Ian's doing it with will.i.am, is being able to set out or to think about the future with visionaries who have imagination and drive and have demonstrated again and again that they're very often ahead of the curve.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat, thanks very much for speaking to us this morning on Britain's Newsroom. Thank you very much. So, shall we bring in Philip Davies?
Yeah, Philip, what did you make of that? It was very interesting, the sort of, I don't know, almost extra deference towards Elon Musk. It makes me think, is the United Kingdom government trying to get something out of Elon Musk? He's announced he's building these gigafactories, building batteries in Germany. Do we want one of these here in the UK too?
Well, any investment would be welcome in that regard. I don't think it's about that. I mean, Rishi is that kind of person. I mean,
a tech geek.
Yeah, I think he's a bit of a tech geek, which I am not. But he's also, I think the thing with Rishi is he's very interested in what other people think. I mean, he's always been like that. When he was Chancellor, he was very keen to speak to colleagues about what they thought should be happening, and he's that kind of person. So I think it was just in character what he was doing. I don't think it was with any ulterior motive. I wouldn't read too much into it. But, look... we rely in this country, and every country relies on its leaders, not just looking at what's in political advantage for the next election, but looking at what's in the strategic interest of the of the country. And I think this is one of those issues that isn't really going to do much good for the Conservative Party at the next general election, but it is important for the future strategic interests of the country, and I think he should be commended for that.
Tom sort of swerved my question, really, about the military being brought in to prevent pro-Palestine protests from escalating on Armistice Day. He said, oh, well, of course, the military will be there for proceedings, of course, for the events. He also stopped short of saying that it should be banned, these marches, over the Remembrance weekend. What do you think? Do you trust that the police can manage these protests? Because we have seen, unfortunately, there have been extremes present at recent protests.
No, well, I'm not sure that they are capable of... I mean, we've had much smaller protests that the police really haven't been able to police effectively. For one reason or another, seemed to be sort of shy away from getting involved in case they feared that the situation would be inflamed by getting involved. Well, if there's going to be... They want 1 million people there, whether they'll get that or not is a different kettle of fish. But if there's going to be a much bigger crowd, it's difficult to see how the Metropolitan Police are going to control it more than they have in the previous demonstration. So I think there is a legitimate doubt about that. Personally, I think whoever has the power, there's a bit of a dispute as to who has the power to cancel this protest, whether it's the Home Secretary or the Mayor of London or the Metropolitan Commissioner. I don't know who it is, but whoever it is, I think they should exercise that power. I absolutely take Tom's point about that we fought for people's freedom to protest. I'm all for people having the freedom to protest, but also you should respect the freedom of people who don't want to protest and that want to go about their business as well. Their rights are just as important. Yeah. And I think that there's plenty of opportunity for people to protest. We've already had lots of Palestinian protest marches and demonstrations, whatever, and they can do them the week after that if they wish. I don't think it's unreasonable for the powers that be to say, actually, on this weekend, you are not going to be allowed to do this protest because we're going to concentrate everything on the act of remembrance that is really important to remember how these freedoms were won and why they're so important. And I don't think it's really unreasonable for anybody to say, let this weekend be sacred. Protest the following week if you want to, but not this weekend. And whoever has the power to stop these protests should exercise that power.
Do you think one of the worries of the police is that they don't really believe in their own authority to some extent? That if they were to say you can't protest, they might worry that a few thousand people might go on the streets anyway, and then what do they do? How do they balance that situation?
I think the police are slightly cowed. I think there's a debilitating culture in the police generally, that people feel that it's better not to make a bad decision than it is to make a good decision, and they try and avoid making any decisions at all because they feel that if they make a decision and something happens, nobody will back them up. And so I think there is that kind of debilitating culture in the police. But, you know, look, the job of the police is to police without fear or favour and to just, whatever the law is, exercise the law.
Exactly.
And that's what we should expect of police. It's not too much to ask, and it's not too much to ask of senior police officers to back rank and file officers.
Thank you very much indeed, Philip Davies there. We'll continue this conversation after the break.
Good morning, it's Alex Burkill here again with your latest GB News weather update. Whilst it won't be anywhere near as stormy as it was yesterday for many of us, there is still some unsettled weather around, particularly across eastern parts of Scotland, northeast England. A deep area of low pressure, that was Kieran, is now bringing some heavy rain and some strong winds here. We could see some further flooding and disruption to travel given how wet it has been in this area during recent weeks. Also a scattering of showers elsewhere, mainly coming in from the northwest. Some of them could be heavy and thundery, but with sunny spells in between. In the south, we're likely to see highs of around 14 or 15 Celsius. Further showers continuing as we go through the evening and overnight. Still, some of them could be heavy. Couldn't rule out some rumbles of thunder, mainly in areas exposed to that northwesterly wind. And then towards the end of the night, some persistent rain and strong winds starting to push into the far southwest. We may see a few mist and fog patches developing further north, and it could be a little chilly where we see any clear skies developing as well. Through Saturday itself then, any mist and fog will clear through the morning, and then this swathe of wet and windy weather spills its way northwards across many parts of England and Wales. Something drier to the north of it, though, some showery rain across the far north of Scotland and heavy showers following in the south, and these could cause some impacts as we go through the afternoon and the evening across southeastern parts. Temperatures similar to today, likely to see highs of around 14 or 15.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Friday the 3rd of November. This is Britain's Newsroom with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood coming up on the show.
Escape from Gaza. 92 Britons are expected to cross the border to Egypt today as Israel surrounds Gaza City in the north. Mark White has the latest from the Gaza border.
Well, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has just arrived in Israel. He's met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, calling for humanitarian pauses, but no let-up in the bombardment here, looking over into northern Gaza.
UK in turmoil. Storm Ciarán leaves thousands without power. 80 flood warnings across the country. Our reporter Jeff Moody is covering the clean-up efforts.
The day after the storm, Storm Ciarán is over, but the clean-up operation is just beginning.
Is Remembrance Day doomed? Tens of thousands of pro-Palestine demonstrators are planning to take to the streets of London this weekend. Is it appropriate?
Musk, we talk about AI. At the end of the AI summit, Rishi Sunak rushed down to meet the world's richest man in Lancaster House and discuss the future possibilities of this remarkable technology.
Although that's not Elon Musk.
That is not Elon Musk.
Unless he's aged quite a lot. I think that's Antonio Gutierrez, who's in charge of the UN. And of course, we want your views and opinions on all of the topics that we're talking about today. What do you make of the AI Armageddon? And should Palestinian protesters be allowed to march throughout Armistice Day? Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com. But before all of that, here's your morning headlines with Sophia.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 10. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Israeli military claims it has encircled Gaza City, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying forces are at the height of the battle. Further advances in the offensive against Hamas look set to involve urban warfare against an enemy fighting back with hit-and-run tactics from underground tunnels. Israel's assault is also complicated by the humanitarian situation and more than 240 hostages still held by the terrorist group. That'll be the focus of Antony Blinken's visit to the region. The US Secretary of State is back in Tel Aviv, where he's expected to press Mr. Netanyahu to agree to a humanitarian pause in fighting. GB News understands up to 100 British nationals trapped in Gaza have been approved to travel through the Rafah crossing into Egypt today. The border is expected to open again for limited evacuations. Palestinian officials say more than 700 foreign nationals have crossed in the past 2 days, including dozens of critically injured people. It comes as Hezbollah's leader is set to make his first public comments since Hamas and Israel went to war. The powerful Iranian-backed terrorist group has been engaging Israeli forces along the Lebanon border, firing rockets and using explosive drones. Israel is responding with airstrikes and tanks, warning Hezbollah against opening a second war front. The Metropolitan Police say it'll use its powers to stop the disruption of Remembrance Weekend commemorations amid ongoing pro-Palestinian protests. Tens of thousands of demonstrators calling for an immediate ceasefire in Israel's attacks on Gaza plan to march in London on Armistice Day. There are fears the protests could disrupt the 2-minute silence that commemorates those who've died at war. The Met says officers will be deployed across the capital in what's being described as a significant policing and security operation. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News that people have the right to protest, but the focus should remain on remembrance.
I think the priority has to be to allow people to have that moment of grief, that moment of national mourning that we share together on the 11th of November at 11 o'clock, and of course on Remembrance Sunday as well. And I think that's absolutely where the focus should be. Of course there are rights to protest at other times. Of course it's right that people should express their views freely. But what's also right is that others have the right to come together and to be quiet and to be still for those 2 minutes which really unite us as a country and remind us of the huge sacrifices paid by so many.
Dozens of flood warnings will remain in place across the country after the damage and disruption of Storm Ciarán. Almost 90 flood warnings are in effect, with more than 235 flood alerts. Parts of eastern Scotland and England are being warned to expect heavy rain and strong winds today and into Saturday. Scottish Rail says full service has been returned at Edinburgh Waverley Station after a signalling fault caused major disruption. Zara Alina's murderer has won a bid to reduce the minimum term of his life sentence. Jordan McSweeney killed the 35-year-old law graduate as she walked home from a night out in East London last June. McSweeney, who refused to attend his sentencing hearing last December, was handed a life sentence with a minimum of 38 years term. The Court of Appeal ruled that this was too high and has reduced it to 33. A woman has appeared in an Australian court charged with the murder of 3 elderly people who are suspected to have died after eating poisonous mushrooms. Erin Patterson is alleged to have hosted a lunch in July at her home in a small rural town in the state of Victoria. Police believe she served beef Wellington, which may have contained death cap mushrooms. Her ex-husband, who was present at the lunch, survived. However, his mother, father and aunt all died in hospital. She's been charged with 3 counts of murder and 5 of attempted murder. There's been a sharp increase in the number of jellyfish spotted around the UK and Irish coasts. The Marine Conservation Society says sightings are up 32% compared to last year, with 11% seen in large blooms of 100 or more. It's understood the increase could be due to the changing temperatures of our oceans, but experts say more research is needed. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Thanks, Sophia. It is 10:06 in the morning. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Harwood and me, Emily Carver.
Well, let's have a little look at what you have been saying at home. And a lot of people have been writing in on this issue of the Armistice Day protests. Lynn says, I believe anyone interrupting the Armistice Day parade should be heavily punished. Despicable.
It's interesting because John's written in, and he may be in the minority this morning. He says, the right to protest is fundamental. The march should go ahead. Think about the feelings of the descendants of those Palestinians who fought with the British during World War II and so on. Wouldn't it be great if the organisers of the protest marched behind matching Israeli and Palestinian flags? Utopia? ? Perhaps, John.
Yes, no, I think the day that protesters will march behind Israeli and Palestinian flags together seems a little bit further away in the last 3 weeks than perhaps it did for any time since the Camp David summit in back in the year 2000, when, of course, the Palestinians walked away from the prospect of a two-state solution.
And Tom Tugendhat, we spoke to him earlier, Security Minister. He stopped short, didn't he, Tom, of saying pro-Palestine protests should be banned in London on Armistice Day, but he made clear that he thought it was disrespectful if they interfered.
But I think that's the right thing to point out, that we should allow disrespectful things in this country. I don't feel comfortable to say that you shouldn't be able to go on the street and say something. That's very different from being able to lie in the road and block a car. That, I think, is not a legal thing to do. But to go and march sort of and say your bit, I think it would be flying in the face of those who died for the liberties of this country to not allow that. I mean, there are countries around the world that you can't protest in, and they're communist China and they're Ayatollah-led Iran.
I'm not sure about that, Tom. It's not as if there haven't been many pro-Palestine marches in the last few weeks. Surely one day it could be prevented.
Well, I think that clearly the compromise here is don't have it.
It would be nice if they didn't want to do it on Armistice Day.
Yeah, well, I think the compromise here is don't do it near Whitehall. Don't do it near the place where we're having the solemn, sacred respect as we should. If they want to go off and do it in a distant corner of London, then fair dues.
Yes, well, Christine says the march should be stopped. It's an insult to our fallen soldiers. A lot of people would agree with you, Christine, but keep your views coming in at home. We want to read them. Mark said about the storm, he said, yesterday's storm, it's miraculous that nobody was seriously injured or killed. Well, there you go. Silver lining to all of that awful weather.
And he was also praising the accuracy of weather warnings, which we don't often hear, which we do not often hear. The weather warnings have a terrible reputation, but I do think in the last decade or so, they actually have got really rather good. And the one thing that I found is that when I have travelled to countries that are less developed than the UK, the weather warnings are terrible. Like you just cannot rely. The only thing that made me think actually our weather forecasting is pretty good in this country is seeing how bad it is in some other countries.
Well, there we go. Something to be grateful for. We know when a storm is about to hit, at least.
Well, the US top diplomat, the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, has arrived in Israel to push for humanitarian pauses, as the IDF says its forces have completed the encirclement of Gaza City, calling it another significant stage in this war.
Yes, meanwhile, in the south, civilians have continued to pass through the Rafah crossing in Egypt. The Foreign Office is able to confirm a number of British nationals are among them.
Well, let's go live now to Mark White, who's on the ground on the Gaza border. Mark, we understand that Antony Blinken has met with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What is the primary purpose of these discussions today?
Well, clearly uppermost in the minds of Antony Blinken and the US government is the ongoing situation as far as civilians trapped in Gaza is concerned. Now, while the US government, of course, continues to support Israel's right to defend itself, what Antony Blinken is just trying to reiterate once again to Benjamin Netanyahu is that as a democracy, Israel has a responsibility to look after civilians as well. Now, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu will point out that they have time and again asked people to leave Gaza, told them that in northern Gaza you should move south because of what was about to follow. And hundreds of thousands of people have chosen not to do that. They've chosen to stay in northern Gaza while the Israeli military push in down towards Gaza City and that stronghold of Hamas. And that means when Israel are called in to carry out airstrikes to support those ground troops, they are going to target Hamas positions, and they say that Hamas is well dug in to the civilian population, very cynically so. And as such, then there is no doubt that civilians are going to suffer. And as I speak, more in the way of a barrage coming from the artillery placements beside us. I'm just going to get out of the way and let you have a look down towards northern Gaza. Where we're looking at the moment is the community of Beit Hanun, which is north of Gaza City, and that has been the scene of intense fighting over the last 24 hours. The Israeli military say that there are well dug in Hamas positions around that city, in the high rises and at ground level, as well as another artillery round heads down towards Beit Hanun. And also in the land, in the open land outside, it seems to have been popping up from tunnels to ambush the Israeli forces. So while the significant Israeli force is pushing down to Gaza City and has now, we're told, encircled Gaza City, it's clear there's still a lot of fighting that's taking place here, but it will be nothing as compared to the battles that will rage in Gaza City, which of course is Hamas's stronghold.
Does it actually matter that the IDF have encircled Gaza City? If they've got all of these tunnels, if they can pop up and pop down anywhere that they want to, if the IDF is around Gaza City above ground, is there not the possibility that Hamas could come up behind them through this network of tunnels?
That's exactly what we've been seeing here, Tom, here in Beit Hanun and the land just in front of Beit Hanun that you can see before us. There have been tanks out there and infantry, men and women, fighting up close and personal to those Hamas terrorists. And what the Israeli Defense Forces have said is that they've been so close, these Hamas fighters at times have tried to clamber up on top of the Israeli tanks. They say, the Israeli Defense Forces say that they have killed dozens of Hamas fighters in this area overnight, but they're still there. And you're right, but the tunnel system, Tom, is so immense. It stretches hundreds of miles, and they've had many years to put those tunnel systems in place. And they have concealed entrances and exits all over the place, so they can pop out and they can ambush, as you say, the Israeli military. We can see perhaps the dust tracks of some of the tanks up there that are pushing through that open ground towards Beit Hanun. We've seen those tanks opening fire earlier this morning towards Beit Hanun and towards those Hamas positions. And it's going, you know, the Israeli military admit it's going to be a very long and a very bloody battle on both sides. We've already had 23 confirmed deaths among the IDF forces. That is no doubt going to rise significantly as they come face to face with their enemy, an enemy that has had a long, long time to prepare for this, that is well dug in, that is set up ambushes in the way of improvised explosive devices, RPGs, anti-tank missiles, positions that they pop up from, and they take a pop at the IDF, and sometimes, of course, they're successful. I should just explain to you what we see and what we hear here. So you will regularly hear the rattling of the machine guns in sustained heavy machine gun fire every so often, and that is clearly when the IDF have made contact with Hamas terrorists in a specific area. Then very soon after that we hear the combat jets overhead, or indeed the Apache helicopters, and then the missiles rain down, or the artillery rains down on the positions that have been called out to them by their ground troops. Close air support effectively as another artillery round leaves our position here to head down towards Beit Hanun. So that's the kind of combat they're engaged in. Part country, part urban, but it's going to get very, very urban as they move into what is the most populous city in Gaza, normally with more than 1 million or so residents. Most have fled, but there are still a good couple of 100,000 people in northern Gaza who have not gone south.
Mark, just very quickly, while we've got you, the Israeli government will be exploring options as to what to do if they achieve their aim of destroying, annihilating Hamas. What then happens to Gaza? What sort of options might they be looking at?
Well, the Israeli government haven't really gone into what they are going to do. If you were you asking about the future of Gaza?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, the Israeli government really haven't gone there. They said that their first priority and their only priority at the moment is to get the hostages rescued and Hamas destroyed. They haven't gone beyond that. That is for, they say, a later stage when they can discuss, once they have removed Hamas from the scene, which is not only, of course, a terrorist organisation, but it is the governing body in Gaza itself. So they want them removed from the scene. Then there will be discussions as to what comes next. There is a fear, though, in the Arab world, and particularly from Israel's neighbours, that actually what we might see in the coming weeks is a forced removal of people from Palestine, from Gaza, and from this area across the border into the Sinai Peninsula. That's why Egypt has been very vocal and said that there is no way that they would accept hundreds of thousands of people spilling over their border into the Sinai Peninsula, with the possibility that they may be cleared out of this strip permanently. And Israel, I don't think, has given that many guarantees that that won't happen. They've been quite silent on this this far.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for the very, very latest there on the Israel-Gaza border. We'll be back with you, of course, if there are any enormous developments there, and do stay safe.
Yes, very interesting, fantastic shots he's got there on the border. We have Benjamin Butterworth in the studio with us, political commentator and GB News presenter. Should we talk about the pro-Palestine protest? This is something that's concerning a lot of our viewers and listeners, as you can imagine, the focus being on the Remembrance Weekend, particularly Armistice Day, the Saturday, the 11th of November.
Yeah, there's been a lot of worry about this, and Sir Mark Rowley, the head of the Metropolitan Police, has spoken about it in the last 24 hours, because there have been some plans to have one of these protests, which have had about 100,000 people on the same day as Armistice Day. Now, organisers have said that that's not something they're necessarily going to do. I think it's more of a threat than a plan. But these events have been taking up to 2,000 police officers in the case of last Saturday's march. They've been getting bigger each weekend. And there are fears both over the fact that the Remembrance Day service takes an enormous amount of police resource. Obviously, the monarch attends alongside lots of veterans and leaders of forces in our military. And then you've had the fact that when you've got 2,000 police officers that are needed for these protests, day-to-day policing across London has been struggling. The London's Metropolitan Police Force has had to be bringing in officers from all around the country because they can't deal with day-to-day crime when you have such a scale.
Yeah.
I mean, to put that in context, 2,000 officers, there is about 34,000 in the whole of the Metropolitan Police. So to have so many in a tiny part of London is a real strain, as well as the threat to be able to secure the Remembrance Day parade.
Perhaps we should take a step back and remember why all of this is happening in the first place. Because, Benjamin, this week you were invited into the Israeli embassy here in London to see some footage that very few people around the world have seen.
Yeah.
The Israeli government hasn't published this online, and this is footage of that massacre 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, so I understand this is very unusual for them to do this, but in New York and in London, they invited journalists to watch the raw footage from Hamas of the 7th of October attack. So much of this is from Hamas live streaming from cameras they had on their bodies that they were sending back to friends in Gaza. And it shows them slaughtering Israelis as they get in there. And it was deeply harrowing. There were images of, and it's unpleasant to describe, I should warn people, but of babies in Disney pyjamas that have been killed, of people being shot as they desperately try to drive away in their car, of people who have been killed being spat on, of the festival. And there was a room that we saw, a concrete room which I take to be at the festival, that was piled high with dead Jewish bodies. And when I saw that, I just couldn't help but think, if the Holocaust had cameras, this is what you would have seen. And I think that's why the Israeli embassy took the extraordinary decision, with the permission of the families as much as they can, to show journalists this evidence, because nothing says Jews don't count like the number of people that you see on the internet, the conspiracy theorists and the racists who try to claim that this atrocity was not as evil as it was. And seeing that raw footage was incredibly harrowing. You know, it's the worst thing I've ever seen, but it's so important that journalists see this so that they can communicate just how bad it is. Of course, when I posted last night the description of what had happened, there were still so many people saying they didn't believe it, that they want these slain civilians to have their tortured bodies broadcast to the world. And I think the message we should take from that is that it is so important that decent people keep speaking up about this, because they are trying to sow the seeds of a new Holocaust denial.
Wow, Benjamin, thank you so much for that vivid description there. It's totally understandable why the Israeli embassy is not making this footage public generally. I understand you had to leave your phone outside the room.
Yeah, so you could only take notes. And, you know, I was reading those notes back as I wrote up my report yesterday afternoon, and it really was harrowing to reflect on it. But I was sat next to Frank Gardner, the BBC's veteran war reporter, and I said to him, have you ever seen anything like this? And he said, no, this is truly abhorrent. And I think there was a temptation to think this is in the normal paradigm of Israel-Palestine and conflicts in the Middle East. You know, it really is an atrocity that we have seen rarely in human existence.
And as you say, there are still people online and unfortunately in our public who refuse to believe it, or refuse to believe the extent of it, or draw false equivalences. But thank you very much indeed, Benjamin. Benjamin Butterworth, there, journalist and broadcaster, telling us about what was a harrowing experience by the sounds of it.
Well, still to come. King Charles has expressed the greatest sorrow and deepest regret over colonial atrocities committed by the British forces in Kenya, but stopped short of a full apology. Well, should Britain apologise? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
the Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Very good morning, it's 10:28 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver.
You are indeed. Now King Charles III and Queen Camilla conclude their state visit to Kenya today.
During the trip, King Charles has expressed greatest sorrow and deepest regret over what have claimed to be colonial atrocities committed by the British forces in Kenya, but he stopped short of an official apology.
So with us now for the very latest is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Cameron, thank you very much indeed. Now, you've been following this trip in great detail. This is the final day, so what happens?
It is. They are currently on the way to the airport, actually, to fly back. They
have
completed their trip. However, today was a bit of a... they had a bit of a problem. It was torrential rain, and I mean proper torrential rain. And there was an issue with that because they were meant to be riding around all day in a tuk-tuk, an electric tuk-tuk, which would have really pleased King Charles because we know how much he loves sustainability. These are the latest pictures of them going to go and sit into the tuk-tuk before a security officer of his decides it's too dangerous for the pair of them to ride around in the tuk-tuk. So there's a bit of an awkward moment. You'll see it in a minute if we keep watching these pictures. Apologies if you're listening on radio, we'll put them on our social media afterwards. But a security officer whispers in his ear, and then he kind of looks a little bit scuffled, and they have to get out of the tuk-tuk and then wander over to a car. But this morning, the King has been talking to different interfaith leaders, so Christianity, Hindu, Muslim and traditional African faiths, all talking about the importance of harmony between different religious groups. We know that in East Africa at the moment there is a big threat when it comes to terror groups such as Al-Shabaab. The King really wanting to create interfaith dialogue in that region. The Queen has been talking about domestic violence. She's been at the domestic violence centre as well in Mombasa. So a very busy final day, but the rain didn't dampen their spirits apart from a tuk-tuk ride, which didn't happen.
I did enjoy the fact that the King was standing there umbrella-less as Camilla was holding holding a little umbrella above her. The king sort of felt perhaps that he didn't need one. Just very briefly, what is the difference between this expressing regret versus apologising? What's the line that the king's walking there?
Well, the king said sorrow, not sorry, and legally they have two very different connotations. It's thought that if he said, I am sorry for the atrocities committed 60 years ago, that opens the British government up to problems when it comes to people filing different legal challenges in courts. They made an out-of-court assessment in 2013 for the Mau Mau uprising atrocities, paid almost £20 million to 5,000 Kenyans, and they don't want to do that again, the British government, as it's understood.
That's a very interesting distinction there, isn't it?
Sorrow, not sorry.
Sorrow, not sorry. There we go. Well, thank you very much.
Highly lawyered language.
Thank you very much, Cameron Walker. Still to come.
No jobs in the future. Well, Elon Musk told the Prime Minister that artificial intelligence may one day eradicate the need for your job entirely. Do you think AI could take your job? Let us know. GBViews
could do your job, Tom. Easy.
How do you know I'm not AI as things stand?
That and much more after your morning news with Sophia.
It's 10:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Israeli military says it surrounded Gaza City, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying forces are at the height of the battle. Further advances in the offensive against Hamas look set to involve urban warfare against an enemy fighting back with hit-and-run tactics from underground tunnels. Israel's assault is complicated by the humanitarian situation and the more than 240 hostages still held by the terrorist group. That'll be the focus of Antony Blinken's visit to the region. The US Secretary of State is back in Tel Aviv, where he's expected to press Mr. Netanyahu to agree to a humanitarian pause in fighting. 92 British nationals trapped in Gaza have been approved to travel through the Rafah crossing into Egypt today, as the border opens again for limited evacuations. Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf's in-laws are included on the list. Palestinian officials say more than 700 foreign nationals have crossed in the past 2 days, including dozens of critically injured people. Zara Alina's murderer has won a bid to reduce the minimum term of his life sentence. Jordan McSweeney killed the 35-year-old law graduate as she walked home from a night out in East London last June. McSweeney, who refused to attend his sentencing hearing last December, was handed a minimum life sentence of 38 years. The Court of Appeal ruled that was too high and has reduced it to 33. Dozens of flood warnings remain in place across the country after the damage and disruption of Storm Ciarán. Almost 90 flood warnings are in effect, with more than 235 flood alerts. Parts of eastern Scotland and England are being warned to expect heavy rain and strong wind today and into Saturday. Nearly 150,000 homes were left without power on Thursday, with around 11,000 still affected. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2218 and €1.1476. The price of gold is at £1,628.32 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,453 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
A very good morning. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News, and it's 10:37. My name's Tom Harwood, and I'm with Emily Carver.
You are indeed. So we're going to go and have a little look at Rishi Sunak's interview, sit-down interview with none other than Elon Musk.
Would your kind of observation be on AI and the impact on labour markets and people's jobs, and how they should feel about that as they think about this?
Well, I think we are seeing the most disruptive force in history here. Where we have for the first time, we will have for the first time something that is smarter than the smartest human. And that, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what that moment is, but there will come a point where no job is needed. You can have a job if you want to have a job for sort of personal satisfaction, but the AI will be able to do everything. So, I don't know if that makes people comfortable or uncomfortable. That's why I say if you wish for a magic genie, that gives you any wishes you want, and there's no limit. You don't have this three wish limit nonsense. You just have as many wishes as you want. It's both good and bad. One of the challenges in the future will be, how do we find meaning in life?
How do we find meaning in life? Well, to answer that elementary question...
He said, this might make you feel uncomfortable, is what Elon Musk said. It makes me feel terrified that robots could become smarter than the smartest human on Earth, and that they could take all of our jobs.
We're close to that point already.
Well, we might already be there.
GPT-4 is better than humans at passing the bar exam. But let's discuss this more widely. Existential questions and the questions of the meaning of life. Delighted to be joined by Matthew Staddon, political commentator, and Reem Ibrahim, communications director at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Matthew, shall we start with you? This was an interesting gamble from the Prime Minister last night, finishing what was widely sort of assessed to be a relatively successful international summit with a conversation with quite a maverick man.
I thought it was an embarrassment. As a proud British citizen, the idea that my Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, is there sort of in supplication to Elon Musk, giggling along, laughing along sycophantically, interviewing him as though Elon Musk is the big guy in the room, which I suppose on one level you might argue he is. But nonetheless, for the British Prime Minister to admit that, I thought that was really cringe-making.
Is that a bit harsh and miserable, Reem? You know, Nigel's written in. He says Elon and Rishi were brilliant, fantastic publicity for the UK and for the conference.
I do think it was fantastic publicity for the future of tech and for the future of innovation in this country. I am deeply concerned by Elon's comments regarding AI. I think they're entirely untrue and effectively will be scaring people into thinking that actually AI and robots are going to be taking over everybody's jobs. I don't think that's true at all. I think we should be excited about innovation. We should be excited about the prospects that AI could provide this country. We're talking about medical advancements. We're talking about solving everyday problems and making all of our lives that much easier. We should be excited by that prospect, not worried by it.
Isn't one of the issues here that Elon Musk was talking perhaps in a centuries-long time frame, and Rishi Sunak was trying to think about perhaps the next 5 or 10 years, and perhaps it's more realistic that all of our jobs are going to be augmented and made easier by AI in the immediate term, but perhaps we'll live in this utopian world where no one works and we've got abundant resources and everyone's the equivalent of a billionaire today. Perhaps that's off in the future.
One good thing about this interview and the fact that Sunak did it is that we are talking about it on GB News, because I think we should spend a lot more time in our national debate, in newspapers, on TV shows, radio stations, talking about something that is almost certainly, I'd say certainly, fundamentally going to change the way we do business as human beings. And it's not just the long term, it is the short term. Fundamental changes are coming down the track. So it's right that the Prime Minister is seeming at least to take this seriously. We as journalists and commentators, I think we could spend a lot more energy getting our own hands dirty, trying to understand the implications.
Reem, do you think you're a little bit too relaxed about the dangers of artificial intelligence? Should we not be concerned if robots become smarter than our smartest human on the earth? What could they do?
I don't think so, and I think we've got to remember that AI is based on history and it's based on information that's already out there. So when we're talking about replacing jobs, you know, jobs that require human touch, we're talking about people that are required to communicate particular ideas. You know, AI can't replace that, but AI can make our lives incredibly more easy when it comes to many of our different jobs. What I am concerned about, though, is the relationship between these tech giants and the government. In this interview, Elon Musk effectively asked Sunak for tax breaks for companies that are looking at particular technological innovations. Now, I think that that is worrying. It's effectively rent-seeking. It's these larger companies trying to get the government to give them particular special privileges. I think we've got to allow the market to work and actually allow us as individuals to see out these technological advancements, because ultimately it will make our lives so much easier.
It was interesting to hear not once but twice Elon Musk in this conversation say, if you want to look at two centres of AI excellence in the world, it's the San Francisco Bay Area and the Greater London area. He was saying it made perfect sense for this AI conference to be in the Greater London area, not quite London, Buckinghamshire, but the fact that the UK is fairly advanced in this might surprise some people.
We do really good with our tech. You look at East London, the Old Street area. This is something that could become a real strength for us, and absolutely, wherever we can be at the forefront, we should be. I think there are two big questions here about AI. One is, how is it going to impact all of our everyday lives? What sort of jobs are going to be lost? How are we going to become a society that doesn't work, if that is the ultimate implication of artificial intelligence?
But it won't be. It won't be. People said this exact same thing when computers were invented, and everyone said, oh, computers are going to take over all of our jobs and make us all jobless. It just didn't happen, and it won't happen.
The fact that it hasn't happened with computers doesn't necessarily mean that it won't happen with AI. The other big question is our safety. We've always thought about this idea of creating a Frankenstein's monster. Are we going to create, in making something more intelligent than ourselves, something that is immune to our regulatory capacities? And if we do, ultimately, there is a chance and I'm an optimist, not a pessimist, but there is a chance that it could destroy us. On the politics of this, who looked at that clip from that interview and didn't ask themselves whether Rishi Sunak in a couple of years' time will be the new CEO of Twitter?
Yes, well, it does look like that. Should we move on to something completely different? It's a bit of a story of our time, this one. M&S apologises, Marks & Spencer, apologises and pulls Christmas advert post after Palestinian flag controversy. Yes.
I mean, this is something that you can't quite... You have to see it to believe it. But, Reem, do your best. What is this story about?
It really is quite silly, and I was seeing a lot of commentary on this on Twitter. It's effectively the M&S social media team that have decided to pull this advert as a result of people that are effectively too chronically online, and see all of this kind of commentary online of people saying that it's inappropriate because, of course, red, white and green, these are lovely Christmas colours, but they also happen to be on the Palestinian flag, and people were offended, as they always are on Twitter,
So
Tom.
the controversy was a still from this advert showed that green, white and red hat sort of burning in a fire,
Yes.
and people thought that, or some people implied were offended because it looked like the Palestinian flag was burning.
Yeah, effectively the news is people online were offended.
This is just crazy, though, because what I found more offensive, Matthew, was the advert itself, regardless of this red, white and green hat in the fire.
It's actually silver, by the way. It's silver.
The advert seemed to be dismissing, actually destroying Christmas traditions, and the message seemed to be, just do whatever you like this Christmas, don't care about your family, just do exactly what you want. If everyone did that, there would be no Christmas traditions at all.
So would you ban the whole advert?
No, I wouldn't ban it, I just wouldn't make it.
I'll tell you what, though, because I had to ask Reem to find this video for me, and when she showed me kindly the video on her mobile phone, I couldn't actually see the bit where supposedly the Palestinian flag is burning. Of course, it's a ridiculous story, but what it does show, I think, is the extent to which the horrors that are playing out in the Middle East are now infecting our own society. We see it with the marches, some people very strongly in favour of them, some people very strongly against them. We see all sorts of tensions, we see rises in anti-Semitism and so forth. Whichever way you look, what's happening in the Middle East has become a tinderbox within our own society, and this is just one offshoot of that.
And it's so peculiar because this was filmed in August, long before... I find it actually quite funny that they film fake snow and Christmas adverts at the height of summer, but there we go, that's the world of advertising. But the fact that then people sort of projected their own views onto this really does say a lot about sort of how discourse works today.
It is, and it's plain virtue signalling, and I really dislike the word woke, but I think it's the only word that's really appropriate here. You know, we've seen M&S effectively try and show that different people like different types of traditions at Christmas, effectively trying to say that you can throw out a lot of those old traditions. Let's all be, all look at Christmas in a very, very different way. Let's celebrate it.
They set Christmas cards on fire.
Yes, it's very sad and very mean, and I personally wouldn't do it.
Is that sad? Is that mean? To me, the message of this is don't worry about consumerism. Christmas is about family.
I love consumerism.
Don't care.
I think it's fantastic.
For a shop that's trying to sell you things. Of course they care about consumerism.
Just to be serious for a second, cards are not really just about consumerism, though, are they? They are sort of, for many people, a fundamental part of the Christmas tradition.
No.
Why are they fundamental? This is a serious point. There are a lot of people around the country who are very lonely, receiving a card, particularly if you're elderly and you don't necessarily have all the tech, receiving a card at Christmas, or maybe even several cards, can be a really important part of the year.
Well, now you're making me feel guilty for not sending Christmas cards last year. I'm going to have to get in a whole host of the... Oh, but
I'd love to receive one from you.
Do you send a Christmas card every year?
I do. To be honest, to be very honest, I don't always. But I should. Certainly to my family.
For people who've sort of grown up in the era of email, it feels like such a bigger step, because it's not something you do every day. I know.
You can get online.
That's what Christmas is about.
You can get online, you can order it, you can add pictures, you can make it personalised. No, I think it's lovely, and also you can handwrite it. I think it's great. You can also do it online and just handwrite it online, if that makes sense, and then send it off. This is again the beauty of technology, guys.
But then you have this perennial issue. Who is on on the Christmas card list and who doesn't make it onto the Christmas card list. You'll always forget someone who's close to you. You'll always offend someone in your friendship.
With any luck, the person that we might forget will be remembered by someone else. But who would have thought we'd have gone from the burning, supposedly, of the Palestinian flag, which of course this wasn't, to whether or not we should send Christmas cards? These adverts actually make us think and talk.
I do love... This is one of my favourite things about this time of year. As we get into the sort of Christmas spirit, and I know it's a little bit early for that, but every year some of the big companies come out, the John Lewis advert, the M&S advert, all of these sort of these adverts sort of have become a bit of a Christmas tradition in and of themselves.
John Lewis is probably questioning whether it's struck the right tone with its one. Well,
I think it's interesting with the ad. I mean, of course, it's again an advert that was filmed in August, and then people are offended about it, you know, some months later as it was announced. But I think it's interesting. Tom doesn't like consumerism, but now loves the John Lewis tradition of those adverts.
Oh, I never said I didn't like consumerism. I say it's the utter right of any company that wants to pretend it's not into consumerism
I agree.
to go down that garden path.
Freedom is freedom.
Well, from consumerism to the sunscreen of the future. Scientists have developed a skin cream that heals sun damage as it happens. This is a game changer, Matthew.
Well, when I started reading this piece this morning, I thought that this might be a way to fight back against skin cancer. And as someone who's had a basal cell carcinoma there before removed, this is obviously something close to my heart. It may turn out to be that, but at the moment it's actually about stopping the ageing process, stopping wrinkling, stopping sagging and so forth, that is as a consequence, at least in part, from sun damage. And what this cream will do, if it actually is brought to market, is stop that process as it's happening. So you put the sun cream on, the sun is trying to damage your skin, but actually the cream prevents that. So it could be it could actually be a real game changer.
Why is this different from normal sun? I thought sun cream prevented your...
So what sun cream does normally, and I'm not a cosmetics expert, as you can probably see, but what sun cream normally does is supposedly tries to help prevent skin cancers and skin damage of that sort, although it's obviously better not to be in the sun than to wear sun cream or to have a hat. Again, I'm not an expert.
So I believe
but what this is doing is this is actually stopping the ageing process, as I say.
So I believe the difference is that with regular sun cream, it blocks out the UV rays, which is of course damaging to your skin. With this, is a type of super melanin. Now, I have the most melanin on this panel, and I think it's that particular difference. That actually, the sun damage that is as a result of the sun, that when you're out in the sun, that kind of damage that you receive as a result of that, is probably the biggest causer of the aging process, wrinkling, etc. Which is why the more melanin you have, the less likely you are to see that kind of sun damage.
No need for Botox then, Tom.
So it's giving pasty people like myself the same sort of protection that people from
like me have.
People with more melanin might have. That's a remarkable thing. I suppose we've had quite a technological focused news review
How
this
brilliant
morning.
it is.
But we do have one extra minute left, and the final story today, Reem, Britain faces recession risk. So after all of this technological promise and happiness, what's this risk from the Bank of England?
Yeah, so the Bank of England have warned that actually next year we potentially will see a recession, which of course anybody that's been following politics over the last few years knows that, during an election cycle, it's the worst time for there to be a recession. I think that there certainly is room for some tax cuts. Actually, for some proper rolling back of the state here. We saw this year that actually, as a result of the OBR statistics, we saw that the government's debt is actually not as high as we thought it was. What that does mean is that there certainly is some room for some true rolling back of the state.
10 seconds to you, Matthew.
Politicians will be terrified of tax cutting after the disastrous Liz Truss premiership. The other thing is, if there is a recession, that is absolutely game over for Rishi Sunak and the Tories.
There we go. On that happy note, on that note of buoyance and positivity. Well, we'll see. We'll see. But let's have a little look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Not quite the calm after the storm, but certainly the weather not as wild today as yesterday. Storm Ciarán continues to head out into the North Sea. There is another deep area of low pressure that will bring some wet and windy weather this weekend. But in between the weather systems, just a few showers around today. Having said that, we are still close enough to the storm in eastern Scotland for more rain to potentially cause some further issues. So we do have a Met Office yellow warning here. Plenty plenty of showers for northwest England, Wales, some for Northern Ireland. Not too many further south and east, though. Many places having a dry and a bright day with some sunny spells. Feels cool, though, in the breeze, but again, the winds nothing like as strong as they were yesterday. As we go through the evening and overnight, a few more showers will drift across the Highlands. We'll see some filtering down across into northern England and Wales. And then that next weather system starts to arrive in the southwest. So more rain coming in here. And because the ground is saturated, that could cause some problems too. Bit of a chilly one over northern England, Northern Ireland, Scotland. Some mist and fog likely. And some pockets of frost also possible. Temperatures holding up in the south because the next band of rain comes in. Again, nothing as heavy as from earlier in the week. But any extra rainfall could cause some issues. We have a Met Office yellow warning across parts of southern England. And the rain lingering across northern England through the afternoon. So quite a cool day here in the south. If it brightens up, we could get into the teens.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's 11 o'clock on Friday the 3rd of November. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Emily Carver and me, Tom Harwood. Coming up today.
Escape from Gaza. 92 Britons are expected to cross the border to Egypt today as Israel surrounds Gaza City. We'll bring you the latest here on GB News.
UK in turmoil. Storm Kieran leaves thousands without power and 80 flood warnings across the country. Our reporter Jeff Moody is covering the clean-up efforts.
The day after the storm, Storm Kieran is over, but the clean-up operation is just beginning.
Is Remembrance Day doomed? Tens of thousands of pro-Palestine demonstrators are planning to take to the streets of London next weekend. Earlier, we asked Security Minister Tom Tugendhat, who is the priority?
I think the priority has to be to allow people to have that moment of grief, that moment of national mourning that we share together on the 11th of November at 11 o'clock, and of course on Remembrance Sunday as well.
We talk about AI. At the end of the AI summit, Rishi Sunak rushed down to meet the world's richest man in Lancaster House, although we're looking at the UN Secretary-General there, Antonio Guterres, not Elon Musk. But it's all about the possibilities, the future possibilities of this remarkable and scaling technology.
He might be a very rich man.
It probably is, actually. I think if you're the head of the UN, I think you're probably... You're not poor, are you?
No, not doing too badly. Yes, we've had quite a lot of interesting discussion of this AI summit. Do you see AI as a fantastic opportunity for the future or a threat and a danger?
No, big questions. But of course, other stories, of course, we want your views and opinions on the Palestinian protests and much more besides. gbviews@gbnews.com is the address to email into. That's after your morning news with Sophia.
Good morning, it's 2 minutes past 11. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Israeli military claims it's surrounded Gaza City, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying forces are at the height of the battle. Further advances in the offensive against Hamas look set to involve urban warfare against an enemy fighting back with hit-and-run attacks from underground tunnels. Israel's assault is also complicated by the humanitarian situation and the more than 240 hostages still held by the terrorist group. That'll be the focus of Antony Blinken's visit to the region. The US Secretary of State is back in Tel Aviv, where he's expected to press Mr. Netanyahu to agree to a humanitarian pause in fighting. 92 British nationals trapped in Gaza have been approved to travel through the Rafah crossing into Egypt today, as the border opens again for limited evacuations. Relatives of Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf are included on the list. Palestinian officials say more than 700 foreign nationals have crossed in the past 2 days, including dozens of critically injured people. It comes as Hezbollah's leader is set to make his first public comments since Hamas and Israel went to war. The powerful Iranian-backed terrorist group has been engaging Israeli forces along the Lebanon border, firing rockets and using explosive drones. Israel is responding with airstrikes and tanks, warning Hezbollah against opening a second war front. The Metropolitan Police say it will use its powers to stop the disruption of Remembrance Weekend commemorations amid ongoing pro-Palestinian protests. Tens of thousands of demonstrators calling for an immediate ceasefire in Israel's attacks on Gaza plan to march in London on Armistice Day. There are fears the protests could disrupt the 2-minute silence that commemorates those who've died at war. The Met says officers will be deployed across the capital in what's been described as a significant policing and security operation. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told GB News that people have the right to protest, but the focus should remain on remembrance.
I think the priority has to be to allow people to have that moment of grief, that moment of national mourning that we share together on the 11th of November at 11 o'clock, and of course on Remembrance Sunday as well. And I think that's absolutely where the focus should be. Of course there are rights to protest at other times. Of course it's right that people should express their views freely. But what's also right is that others have the right to come together and to be quiet and to be still for those 2 minutes which really unite us as a country and remind us of the huge sacrifices paid by so many.
Dozens of flood warnings remain in place across the country after the damage and disruption of Storm Ciarán. Almost 90 flood warnings are in effect and more than 235 flood alerts. Parts of eastern Scotland and England are being warned to expect heavy rain and strong wind today and into Saturday. Scottish Rail says a full service has been returned at Edinburgh Waverley Station after a signalling fault caused major disruption. Zara Alina's family have described the reduction of her killer's sentence as a shallow triumph, which sends a disheartening message to women, calling him a repugnant man. Jordan McSweeney killed the 35-year-old law graduate as she walked home from a night out in East London last June. McSweeney, who refused to attend his sentencing hearing last December, was handed a life sentence with a minimum of 38 years. The Court of Appeal has reduced that to 33 years. A woman has appeared in an Australian court charged with the murder of 3 elderly people who are suspected to have died after eating poisonous mushrooms. Erin Patterson is alleged to have hosted a lunch in July at her home in a small rural town in the state of Victoria. Police believe she served beef Wellington, which may have contained death-cap mushrooms. Her ex-husband, who was present at the lunch, survived. However, his mother, father and aunt all died in hospital. She's been charged with 3 counts of murder and 5 of attempted murder. There's been a sharp increase in the number of jellyfish spotted around the UK and Irish coasts. The Marine Conservation Society says sightings are up 32% compared to last year, with 11% seen in large blooms of 100 or more. It's understood the increase could be due to the changing temperature of our oceans, but experts say more research is needed. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Thanks, Sophia. It's 11:06 in the morning. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood.
Well, let's have a little look at what you've been saying at home. First of all, we've been talking about, well, 3 big stories today, and one of the biggest has been these Palestinian protesters. Should they march on Remembrance Sunday, or indeed the 11th of November on the Saturday? And Keith says that he doesn't think that Palestinian protesters should be allowed to protest. We need to respect our war heroes who gave us freedom.
Yes, and we see there from Pete. Sorry, I don't have my paper over here. Pete says, as a veteran, this makes me sick to the core. Out of respect for what we have done for those who protest, keeping them safe from harm, they don't know true British values. I do think you make a good point there. Why on earth would you choose to march on Armistice Day, which means so much to British people?
Of course it's distasteful, but I think we should be allowed to do distasteful things. And Keith's whole point was that our heroes gave us our freedom. Well, freedom to do what? Do you have freedom if you can't do distasteful things?
I think you're on the wrong side of this, Tom. I think it would be
wouldn't
fine.
go on the march, but I wouldn't stop it.
Well, let's hope it does not interrupt any of the remembrance events. That would be just ghastly.
Yeah. Oh, and
in my
for balance,
opinion.
Oscar has written in to say, I fully support the protests. Everyone should have a right to demonstrate. So there you go. Mixed opinions in the inbox. Although I think it's fair to say many more people saying that this is entirely inappropriate and should be banned on Armistice Day.
Yes, I just wish it wasn't planned. That's my view, really.
Yes.
I just wish it weren't the case that people would do such a thing. But it looks like the police are going to be working very hard to stop any potential disruption or conflict there.
But shall we stick with this topic now? The idea of these protests that are becoming so regular now over the course of Gaza and Palestine more generally. We're joined in the studio by the political commentator John Oxley. And John, this is sort of becoming a weekly event now.
Yes, and I think what we've seen is this is really motivating a huge amount of people in this country who perhaps we don't always see out on protests. And I think it's really interesting to see how this has galvanised so many people and is becoming an established thing. There's obviously quite a network there. And I think it's something newly emerging in British politics and could really have electoral and political impacts as well.
Yes, shall we have a look at what the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, said about whether people have the right to protest in this way?
I think the priority has to be to allow people to have that moment of grief, that moment of national mourning that we share together on the 11th of November at 11 o'clock, and of course on Remembrance Sunday as well. And I think that's absolutely where the focus should be. Of course, there are rights to protest at other times. Of course, it's right that people should express their views freely. But what's also right is that others have the right to come together and to be quiet and to be still for those 2 minutes which really unite us as a country and remind us of the huge sacrifices paid by so many.
So this is all about competing rights for Tom, the Security Minister.
Yes, and I think that's the best way of
Not
looking
you.
at it. But also for you, I think.
Too many people are called Tom, so it's a deeply...
That's what we should ban.
Do you know what? It must be very irritating in Islamic countries where you just say Mohammed and everyone turns their head. I don't know if that's an appropriate joke to make or not, but...
Yeah, but going back to the overall point, he's right, the people who died in the wars died for our freedom, and that is our freedom to do stuff and to protest. And I absolutely agree with, I think, both of you, that this is quite a disrespectful thing to do, to go out on Armistice Day. It is probably counterproductive. It's not going to persuade people. It's going to alienate a lot of people. But freedom means allowing lots of things that we find distasteful and disagreeable, and we should be very, very careful. It's one thing if they're going out openly supporting violence and terrorism. It's something slightly different if they're just making their view heard.
Well, I think that's the issue, isn't it? Because unfortunately we have seen with some of these pro-Palestine marches that they attract extremists among the throngs of people who rally in the pro-Palestine protests, and that's the issue. I think a lot of people are concerned that the police aren't policing as tough as they should be, essentially. They're being too soft touch, is what I'm trying to say.
I think there's a definite argument there, and we've seen very shocking things said and done by some of these protesters. But I think we also have to think about how the police handle these mass incidents. The police strategy generally is to record evidence and deal with them afterwards, because you're talking about respecting Armistice Day, going in mob-handed to arrest 30 troublemakers in a crowd of 10,000 people, potentially creates a spark and a riot point that makes the whole thing far more disrespectful of the peace of Armistice Day than sort of letting these people carry on and then going and seeing them, you record them, you have the evidence, and then you can act afterwards.
Interesting point.
I think it's worth saying what the Met Police have said. So 17 hours they put out a statement saying that officers will be deployed across London on the 11th and the 12th of November. Significant policing and security operation. Absolutely committed to ensuring the safety and security of anyone attending commemorative events. We know that there are concerns about a demonstration by pro-Palestinian campaigners. They say this is a weekend with huge national significance. We will use all the powers available to us to ensure anyone intent on disrupting it will not succeed. So that's quite a strong tone from the police.
Yes, and it sounds like partly they've had a couple of weeks of dealing with these protests. They've got used to it now. It's not taking them by surprise. And also to remember, this is such an big weekend of national significance that this will not just be a public order thing. There will be counter-terror issues to bear in mind. And so probably you've got a lot of the Met working together and taking this quite seriously to make sure there are no flashpoints, to make sure there's no major incidents, to keep everyone safe, but also to respect the boundaries of the law around protest and freedom to say what you want to say.
Now, we just have a couple of minutes to dwell on another big political story this week, which, of course, has been the ongoing COVID inquiry. And perhaps one of the biggest flashpoints was when Dominic Cummings appeared before that inquiry. But there's someone a little bit interesting who's had some thoughts on Dominic Cummings and his appearance before the inquiry, and that's the supermodel Caprice. She appears in the newspaper today saying the most remarkable quote. She says, "I'm a huge fan of Dominic Cummings." Why is Caprice such a big fan of Dominic Cummings?
Well, it seems like they're sort of backing each other. People forget, but way back early in COVID, before we'd even entered lockdown, Caprice was sort of on one of these TV panel shows, and she was calling for hard action, closing the borders, moving towards lockdown. And these health experts who were advising at the time, no, we didn't need to do anything, were quite mocking of her. And it turned out really she was right. And Dominic Cummings sort of highlighted this in his testimony, or certainly talking around it, that she was right and they were wrong, and that sometimes you need to listen to people without the expertise or people who are prepared to challenge people. And so I think she's probably got a bit of a soft spot for him.
And this is a crucial point, isn't it? Because at the start of the pandemic, the narrative as things are set is that, oh, the politicians were saying, no, we don't need to lock down, and all the scientists were saying lockdown. But that's not what was the case at all. Right through early March, the scientists were saying, don't lock down.
That's exactly true. But what we saw with people were taking it into their own hands. You know, I was working in the city at the time, and each day it was getting emptier and emptier, way ahead, you know, a couple of weeks ahead of actual lockdown. And then what happened was, I think it was Neil Ferguson came out with this new model, and it was that suddenly chucked the government into becoming much more in favour of lockdown and moving to it. But yeah, the grassroots thing at the start were people were way more cautious than the government.
I must represent the lockdown sceptics among us, though, and say that it seems as though there is an accepted storyline, a narrative now from this inquiry, that the issues with the government's response were that they were not tough enough with their lockdowns, were not quick enough in introducing them. Others might ask, was lockdown ever worth it? Are we going to have that discussion with this inquiry? I know you're frowning there, Tom.
Because I was sat through some of that testimony, and I was like, they're not talking about lockdown at all. They're talking about politicians and their language. They're talking about swearing more than they're talking about the actual epidemiological discussions that you think would be good.
No, but when they were talking to Dominic Cummings, when Hugo Keith KC was talking to Dominic Cummings, the assumption was, particularly from Dominic, of course, but also in the line of questioning, that the government had fallen short on its decisions in terms of the speed in which they were made.
I don't necessarily think that was the line of the questioning, because I sat through the entirety of Cummings.
You don't think there's a narrative that the government made mistakes in terms of when they implemented the lockdown rather than whether it should have been implemented at all?
I think there are arguments in terms of who said what to when, whether Boris Johnson should have gone on holiday in that half term. That was a big point of discussion. But I think one of the big takeaways for me was the lack of discussion over the actual epidemiological points. And perhaps that does feed into your argument. Perhaps there should be listening what would have been the difference if there had been more voluntary measures as opposed to more mandatory measures. As John Oxley, as you've been saying, people were starting to take things into their own hands anyway. That would have been a very interesting discussion.
But I mean, on Tom, the way that they've highlighted that Boris Johnson was talking about trade-offs as if it was a negative thing, no? In terms of whether we should have been shielding the vulnerable as opposed to locking down all of the public?
Yes, and I think there has been some sensationalist reporting around that. After all, it is a legitimate discussion to say if you've got a dichotomy between the economy and a certain section of society, where do you draw the line? Final word to you, John Oxley. Do you have faith in this inquiry that we now learn is going to stretch on for many, many more years?
Well, I think that's always the key question. We've seen time and time again these inquiries go on forever. The Bloody Sunday inquiry went on for years, was hugely expensive. And often they fail to get into the real gritty questions, and they do get bogged down in supplementary things. And, you know, the other problem is you're always chasing after the last crisis. You know, they will come out with all sorts of recommendations about how we deal with the potential for the next pandemic. But then there will be potentially a major terror attack, and we'll find our response for that has been completely neglected in the same way that pre-pandemic planning had been. So I'm very sceptical that it will really help governments in future function.
Yes, I imagine most people don't care so much about Dominic Cummings' use of foul language, more so than they care about how decisions were made and why the restrictions were chopped and changed so much, why children perhaps were neglected when it came to the equation done to justify lockdown. All questions we want the answers to. Perhaps we will get those. It is going to be a very long and expensive inquiry. So there we go.
Yeah, so John Oxley, thank you so much for talking us through those two enormous issues this week.
Yes, thank you. Well, the storm Kieran has swept across the British Isles and the Channel Islands, leaving roofs torn off, homes and cars smashed by golf ball-sized hailstones.
Well, GB Views from the Channel Islands have sent in their experiences of the carnage.
I'm in Jersey, Channel Islands, where the storm passed through us in the early hours of this morning. So between 2, 3, 4 o'clock, winds were reaching up to 104 miles an hour. Caused extensive devastation, particularly in the south of the island. Many residents evacuated throughout the night by the emergency services who were fairly well stretched. It is only a small island, and yet, as you can see in the background, there's still a lot of heavy rain in the sky, but generally the winds are just starting to ease off. Fortunately, I was pretty lucky, as you can see in the background, just a load of fence panels down, so I count myself very lucky, but unlike many residents.
Here in Guernsey, the intensity of the storm hit us at around 2:30 a.m. and has been continuing to batter the island ever since. We've seen reports of over 70 trees down, and that's probably just the ones reported on main thoroughfares. In Guernsey, we have lots of small roads that they're covered in debris, and the clean-up operation is going to take some time yet. The government made a decision on Tuesday to close all schools given the intensity that the storm was going to have, and that meant that businesses also made the decision to close today. So pretty much we're in lockdown here in Guernsey.
Broken, gone. Broken, gone for the roofs and the houses. Police cars littering the roads, ambulances, fire engines. I wouldn't be surprised if all the fire engines were out last night. Our next door neighbour Doris, her house was flooded. My mum and dad were going around there to help them. There's like 2 tons of sand on all our balconies, just being thrown over. Yeah, Jersey is pretty much said to everyone, don't go into work. The majority of us just got the day off, and you can see why, because it was carnage. Everything was just getting blown to the right.
Well, carnage. That was Stephen, Jess and William and Jack. And thank you so much for sending us in your videos. Of course, if you live in an area affected by these storms, then do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com. But let's now go live to Jeff Moody, who is on the south coast of England. And Jeff, the clean-up effort has begun.
It has indeed. I mean, what a difference a day makes. I mean, it's glorious sunshine today. I mean, the waves here yesterday were absolutely huge. And you can see that the damage that they've caused, if you just look at this brick wall, the waves have been so strong and fierce that it's totally taken down these walls and even the paving stones that were on top of the walls. And if you look over here and see the pier, for those listening on the radio, the pier is... part of the pier is totally destroyed. All of the cladding has come off of it. It's a mess. It's a family-run pier, and hopefully it won't take them too long to repair. But luckily, you were hearing just now how Jersey and the Channel Islands had the worst of it. Luckily, here in the UK, this is the sort of thing we're dealing with. We're not dealing with loss of life. We're dealing with loss of buildings, loss of infrastructure. Most of the situation seems to have gone away now that Storm Ciarán is up in the North Sea and dissipating considerably. Train lines are open again, ferries are open again, the crossing to France is open, Dover is fully functional again, schools are starting to come back as of Monday, so really we are over the worst of it. But there are still some important flood alerts and some flood warnings in place, quite a few flood alerts in fact, dotted right across the country, but most particularly up in parts of Scotland and in the southeast of England. The flood alert there is for Saturday. So we are still looking at some torrential downpours on top of all the rain that we've had before, but nothing like we saw yesterday. So I think we got away with it lightly.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jeff Moody, there on the Devon coast.
Yes, and thank goodness that we haven't seen any loss of life. It could have been so much worse. And we've had some people writing in, actually, saying that thank goodness that people have been... the forecast, that the weather forecasting has actually been pretty superb with regard to this storm.
Yeah, I really appreciated seeing what life is actually like and the destruction that's occurred from our viewers. Fantastic shots there, but obviously huge amounts of carnage and destruction. It's what storms do.
Yes, well, still to come. Is an Englishman's right to set off fireworks in his own back garden? Is that a right of every free-born Englishman, or indeed citizen of the rest of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Find out next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. It's 11:28, and you're with me, Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver.
You are. Now, veteran charities are calling for tougher restrictions on the sale of fireworks. Help for Heroes and Combat Stress say unexpected flashes and loud noises can bring back traumatic memories of combat.
Well, joining us to discuss this is the head of clinical and medical services at Help for Heroes, Carol Betteridge. Good morning, Carol. I suppose a lot of people would be worried at the prospect of further government restrictions on what people can buy.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And we don't want to affect people's fun or the enjoyment of fireworks in November and other cultural events. But what we would ask is that there's an independent review on the sale to help people understand that it can have a really traumatic event on veterans. As you can imagine, being in a conflict or involved in an explosion, and then the sight, the sound, and the smells of fireworks can have a really distressing effect on our veterans. And so we'd really like that to be reviewed.
Carol, a lot of the time when we talk about fireworks, we talk about pets actually finding a lot of distress. Many of our viewers won't be aware that this can be quite triggering for veterans. Can you explain a little bit about the experience some veterans might have hearing fireworks?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, if you are in an explosion, it's that bright light, the loud noise and the smell that's really mirrored in the effects of the firework going off. And 74% of our veterans in a recent survey would really like the days to be restricted. So perhaps in public events rather than everybody's gardens, just to try and help them in that difficult experience of the firework. As you said, we have a right to choose. Everybody has a choice, but we would like you to consider those who fought and still fight to allow people to have that choice, just to consider them this weekend and next weekend during Remembrance. Just remember that you have that choice because of...
Well, thank you very much indeed. Carol Betteridge there, Head of Clinical and Medical Services at Help for Heroes. Some food for thought there.
Let's get some more analysis now from the Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Christopher Snowdon. Christopher, Carol's there asking for some days where fireworks are not set off to respect the wishes of our veterans.
Yeah, but which ones? I mean, obviously the big one is coming up, November the 5th. Are we allowed to set fireworks off any other day for our birthdays, for anniversaries, for other celebrations? Look, I'm very sorry if people are distressed by fireworks. I genuinely do sympathise with any veterans with PTSD or so on. But I mean, I'm afraid there are all sorts of things that can always distress somebody or other at some point, and you can't just go around banning things on that basis, in my view.
Christopher, what do you think about, Carol also mentioned public events versus letting off fireworks in your garden. Do you have sympathy with the view that perhaps fireworks should be left just to public monitored events?
No, quite the opposite, actually. I think it's a lamentable turn of events over the last few decades that people have stopped letting off fireworks in their garden, which is much more fun than going to a firework display. I think firework displays are extremely boring. I think governments waste far too much money putting them on. They go on too long, apart from anything else. There's only about 3 different types of fireworks, as far as I can tell. And after about 2 minutes, it all gets a bit samey. Whereas sticking a Catherine wheel on your garden fence and setting it off is much more exciting. And there's also that element of danger, which you don't tend to get with the government-organised events.
Well, Christopher, you're also a time zone activist, of course. You're campaigning for it to be more light in the evenings. Does that not rather contradict your pro-firework position if it's going to be very, very bright in these dark winter evenings after your time zone reform that you've been trying to get British summertime throughout the whole of the year? Does that not undermine your case for fireworks?
Well, this time of year, Tom, it's getting dark thanks to the Greenwich Mean Time fanatics. It's getting dark at 5 o'clock. And under my sensible system, it would get dark at 6 o'clock. Either way, there's plenty of time to let off fireworks in your back garden.
And Christopher, do you have a dog?
No, I've got a cat.
And how does your cat fare when it's fireworks night?
Loves it.
I'm not sure if that's true. My dog cowers, terrified, shaking. And I think the problem is we all can prepare for bonfire night, but when there are fireworks going off all throughout the autumn and winter, it can get quite tricky for people with pets and, of course, veterans, as we were discussing.
To some extent, this is an argument for planning reform, to build better insulated houses that keep out the big, loud noises.
Yes, and gardens, big spacious houses, not just flats, but lovely suburban houses with nice big gardens to put a Catherine wheel in.
Well, there we go. We've managed to tie the fireworks conversation into many other subjects. Thank you very much indeed, Christopher Snowdon, the Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs.
It's wonderful when these stories all come together. You know, we've got Remembrance, we've got Fireworks Night, we've got even British Summertime and Greenwich Mean Time. Wow, what a show.
Let us know at home what you think about that one. I imagine it will probably divide our viewers and listeners.
Yes, because I think everyone instinctively... Well, it's like these marches again. You instinctively instinctively want to be in favour of veterans and respect and being nice, but also you've got to support freedom.
You do. Well, still to come.
Matt Hancock has been in the news all week, but when he wasn't socially distancing from his secretary during COVID, was Matt the one deciding who lives and dies?
Gosh, find out after your morning news with Sophia.
It's 11:34. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The US Secretary of State is back in Tel Aviv, where he's pressed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a humanitarian pause in fighting. The White House has previously said any pause in fighting should be temporary and dismissed calls from Arab and other nations for a full ceasefire. The Israeli military claims it surrounded Gaza City, with forces saying they're at the height of the battle. The assault is complicated by the humanitarian situation and more than 240 hostages still held by the Hamas terror group. The Metropolitan Police say it'll use all its powers to stop the disruption of Remembrance Weekend commemorations amid ongoing pro-Palestinian protests. Tens of thousands of demonstrators calling for an immediate ceasefire in Israel's attacks on Gaza plan to march in London on Armistice Day. There are fears the protest could disrupt the 2-minute silence that commemorates those who've died at war. The Met says officers will be deployed across the capital in what's being described as a significant policing and security operation. Zara Alina's family have described the reduction of her killer's sentence as a shallow triumph, which sends a disheartening message to women, calling him a repugnant man. Jordan McSweeney killed the 35-year-old law graduate as she walked home from a night out in East London last June. McSweeney, who refused to attend his sentencing hearing last December, was handed a 38-year life sentence. The Court of Appeal ruled that was too high and has reduced it to 33 years. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2221 and €1.1481. The price of gold is £1,627 and 7 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,441 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Well, it's 11:40. Sorry, I thought you were going to do that one, but it does actually say my name on the auto cue. You should have paid attention there. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver.
Yes, now we've had lots of emails coming in over the debate around fireworks. A lot of veterans can be distressed by fireworks with PTSD and so on. It can remind them of being at war or in a war zone. Who is this? Malcolm from Carlisle has says... Oh, no, we don't want to do that one. That's a bit rude. Reid says fireworks should be limited to certain days and times outside that should be illegal or eligible for a fine. I think they should also use silent fireworks. You don't need the loud bangs for the spectacle.
You do need the loud bangs. I find there are people who say you can just replace fireworks with drones, and drones are lovely. They can make pretty shapes in the sky, but you don't get the fizz and the pop and the excitement and the smell and everything that makes the 5th of November so very magical. Adrian says the plague of irresponsible people with explosives, brackets fireworks, letting them off through the night. Fireworks should only be sold to licensed organised events. So Adrian disagrees with me, and he wants a licensed Raj for fireworks.
And Anne has a simple solution. She says, ear defenders. My husband uses them all the time, especially when I'm talking to him. Oh, there we go. Love is paradise.
That is I think, probably the most sensible suggestion that we've had in the inbox overall. But let's move on to other stories now. Delighted to be joined by the political commentator Matthew Stadlen and the communications officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim. And Matthew, let's start with you, because we have been talking about these Palestinian marches, and particularly one that's planned for the 11th of November.
Yes, so this is obviously causing concern, not just amongst police forces, because of the strain that they're under anyway on Remembrance Weekend, but also amongst Jewish communities. And it's this wider question of what's happening in the Middle East, the horrors that we're witnessing, the horrors we saw in Israel, the horrors that we're seeing in Gaza are now being reflected within our own society. And Remembrance Weekend, of course, is a very, very important date in our national calendar. It's a moment when we respect and remember those who died in our name, in the name of freedom. That's why we're wearing poppies right now. So any hint that Sunday itself, which is, of course, Remembrance Sunday, that's when the big ceremonies at the Cenotaph takes place, any hint that that could be disrupted is very concerning. A lot of people will find very offensive. This march, as recent marches have taken place, is due to take place on the Saturday, which is Remembrance Day, because it's the 11th. I think it would be more concerning were it due to take place on the Sunday, but there is some fear that there will be overspill onto the Sunday, and that will make the lives of police officers much more difficult than they otherwise would be.
And just on that point, do you think, therefore, that this march on the Saturday should go ahead, almost let people let off steam then, so that then the Sunday is kept more sacred?
I just feel, and we know that GB News brands itself as the home of free speech. Of course, we understand there are limitations to free speech as well as responsibilities. I feel that so long as people are demonstrating within the law and peacefully, we shouldn't be stopping marches full stop. So that would even extend to Sunday. Do I think that people would be well advised to march on Sunday? Absolutely not. Do I think that any support of Hamas needs to be clamped down upon by the police? I absolutely do. Any hint of anti-Semitism, we need to root this out. But I do believe in the freedom to protest.
Reem, I don't think we can understate how upset many British people will be if we do see mass protests during Remembrance.
Of course, but I think that, you know, as Matthew pointed out, we shouldn't just be banning things because people are upset by it. I think that, Emily, you would also maybe agree with me that, you know, we shouldn't be banning speech because some people are offended or upset by it. Now, of course, as a result of these protests, many people will be upset because they feel as though it is taking away the limelight from those incredibly brave people that fought for our country. However, there are also many people that would like to go on these marches because they feel as though they want to grieve with one another for the millions of lives that are potentially at risk as a result of this horrible situation that is occurring in the Middle East. I think it's important that we uphold freedom of expression, even if it's for those people that we may disagree with.
Even though we know that this march has been organised and it's going to be bussing in people from all over the country, at the same time as our veterans and those who've given their lives for our security and our freedoms should be respected and remembered. I cannot think of anything more tasteless.
I would actually agree. I do think it's tasteless, but I think that ultimately we should be allowing people to do that if they wish to. And I think that it's very dangerous territory that we can enter into if we start banning protests because people are offended by them. As soon as we start banning language that people are offended by, we're entering a very, very, dare I say, authoritarian / dystopian era when we start getting into that. And I think that, you know, I think GB News is fantastic for this, for allowing freedom of expression, allowing for this kind of open debate. We have to be consistent about it, and even if it's things that we disagree with, we have to still allow it to happen.
Yes, I wonder if the compromise here, and this is what the police are saying, is that there will be no disruption of proceedings with relation to remembrance events. So protests, if they happen, can take place elsewhere away from Whitehall.
Just to say on the substance of what some of these marchers are marching for, doesn't mean that I don't think they should be allowed to march, but I would ask them some serious questions. They say free Palestine. That, on the face of it, seems to be innocuous. Who wouldn't want to be free? I just ask them this. If you're the Israeli government, and I'm someone who thinks the Israeli government is far right and that Netanyahu is a dangerous figure to be heading up Israel, not least because these attacks, these medieval attacks on Israel happened under his watch, but also because under his premiership, illegal settlements have continued to be built in the West Bank. But even if someone with the best of intentions was Prime Minister of Israel, how do you free Gaza when we know that there are people in Gaza in the shape of Hamas who want to wreak terrible atrocities in Israel?
Well, this is a very good point. We don't see people on these marches calling for, I don't know, free Palestine from Hamas, for example.
But also, what does it mean to free Gaza? Israel hasn't been in Gaza for more than a decade.
What it
Israel
means,
withdrew all of its troops.
Yeah, what they think it means is presumably to take down the border fence, because Gaza is, to some extent, an open-air prison. What I ask these people is, if you have a death cult that is in charge of that strip of land, how can any government, even if it is, as I say, well-meaning and trying to do the right thing, even if it is idealistic, how can it take down that security infrastructure when, even when it existed, these atrocities were able to be perpetrated?
I've got to say, I suspect that the majority of the people that will be protesting on Saturday haven't thought this far, and actually they don't really think beyond the sort of notion of free Palestine. But again, I mean, they should be free to do so, and we can have these open conversations. I suspect what people generally mean when they say free Palestine is freedom from the illegal settlements that the Israeli government have pushed forward. I do worry that many of these protesters have not come out hardline line against Hamas and their absolutely horrendous actions on October 7th, and indeed to their own Palestinian
I think they actually go further than just freeing the West Bank. They use this phrase, this inflammatory phrase, don't they, from the river to the sea. That includes Gaza. So if you ask the vast majority of people on this march what they mean by free Palestine, it would include freeing Gaza, I would suspect, from the security apparatus. And I just can't understand how you can logically have that position.
And there's also the kind of people, and I've seen many videos on these marches of people ask, what do you mean by free Palestine? Where do you count Palestine to be? And they say all of the area, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, which means the annihilation of the Jewish state.
Yes, I hope, conversely, that if you were to talk to most people on this march, they haven't thought that phrase through, and that if they did, they wouldn't be calling for the elimination of Israel. If they believe in the elimination of Israel, I'm afraid that amounts to anti-Semitism and a very severe type of it.
I totally disagree. I think you can be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic. I think that, generally speaking, many people confuse the two, conflate the two, and they tend to go hand in hand. But it is absolutely a perfectly reasonable position to have, to be anti-Zionist and not...
Hang on, is it a reasonable position to have to say that one country in the world uniquely shouldn't exist?
Yes, I mean, if you're an anarchist and you're against all states...
Right, but that's the thing. If you're someone who's against colonialism and you say, I don't think Israel should exist, or Australia, or New Zealand, or America, or Canada, then that's consistent. But if you say that, but only for the Jewish states, doesn't that raise an eyebrow?
Well, I think that the idea here is that many people, and again, this is an opposition I agree with, I believe in the UN solution in two states, but there are many people that would hold the position that the establishment of the State of Israel was enforced upon them. It was promised in the Balfour Declaration only, just over 100 years ago. It really was not a state that had pre-existed. Again, I mean, I don't believe in these arguments, but I'm saying that they're reasonable arguments that aren't
depends how far back you go.
I feel quite strongly about this. You're absolutely right that Israel and Jews sometimes are conflated. Anti-Semites use Israel as a way to express their anti-Semitism, and some people who defend Israel, right or wrong, use anti-Semitism as a way of searching for impunity for Israel. But if you are calling for the annihilation of the Jewish state, yes, there are 2 million Arabs, I think, who live within Israel proper, but nonetheless, I cannot see how that comes from a position of anything other than anti-Semitism.
I think there are many people that would disagree with you. I mean, again, this is not a position I hold, but I'm saying that there are many people that would argue that historically, looking at the way in which effectively the West have built up these two states, the PLO have failed. Hamas now have control over Gaza entirely, and there are other militant groups that have control over other Palestinian territories. There are many people that would hold the position that Israel itself is an unjust state. Again, it's not one I agree with.
But there are people who've lived there for decades after decade after decade. There are some families who have been there for hundreds of years, and therefore, if you're calling for the annihilation of Israel, in effect, you're calling for millions of Jews to be displaced. That would be ethnic cleansing along anti-Semitic lines.
And a lot of Jewish people in this country, unfortunately, and across the West, are genuinely fearful of what they're seeing on our streets, whether it's people ripping down posters of hostages that are still being kept by Hamas, whether it's anti-Semitic chants, which we have seen, calls for jihad. People are scared. We can't underestimate that.
It's worth thinking back to the Camp David summit in 2000 as well, when there was a position for a two-state solution there on the table. I think the Palestinian Authority was offered something like 98% of the West Bank and all of Gaza and the rest of it. And because of this purist anti-Israel position, the Palestinian authorities at that summit walked away from that offer, which just seems extraordinary.
That's a really tricky and important period of history, because it did seem that there was hope, and many people do blame Palestinians for the Palestinian leadership at the time for turning down that opportunity. But if you ask some people who are more sympathetic to the reasons they turned it down, it was because they thought that it wasn't actually a viable Palestinian state. So this is really tricky territory. It's enormously nuanced. The real tragedy for me, apart from the repercussions that we're seeing within our own society that we've talked about, the real tragedy for me is I cannot see how this is solved. I cannot see how Israel's legitimate security concerns tally with innocent Palestinians' legitimate desire for freedom. And that, for me, is a tragedy.
And And I suppose Israel will be thinking, looking at Gaza, looking at the situation there, as soon as they leave again, it's probable, perhaps, that Hamas just grows back up again.
Absolutely, and this is the problem with many people that are calling for a ceasefire. Ultimately, we know, throughout history, when we see a ceasefire, it freezes conflicts in the position that they are currently in. That will, again, allow Hamas to build up their artillery functions even more, and I think it's very we cannot underestimate the complexities of this conflict, and I think it's very important that we do so, but it's very interesting to see the way in which other countries have responded. I mean, I'm half Egyptian. We've seen the Egyptian government come out and say, Hamas are an absolutely horrendous organisation. But again, we need to be thinking about the complexities on the ground.
Well, it's such a complex issue. I'm afraid we have run out of time. We were going to get to more stories, but this conversation has been so fascinating. And thank you, both of you, for talking us through these, as we say, deeply complex issues.
Yes, Matthew Stadlen and Reem Ibrahim, thank you very much indeed. We've come to the end of our show. It has flown by again. Tom with you. Coming up next is GB News Live with Dawn Newsroom today. Britain's Newsroom is back Monday at 9:30.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Not quite the calm after the storm, but certainly the weather not as wild today as yesterday. Storm Ciarán continues to head out into the North Sea. There is another deep area of low pressure that will bring some wet and windy weather this weekend, but in between the weather systems, just a few showers around today. Having said that, we are still close enough to the storm in eastern Scotland for more rain to potentially cause some further issues, so we do have a Met Office yellow warning here. Plenty of showers for northwest England, Wales, some for Northern Ireland. Not too many further south and east, though. Many places having a dry and a bright day with some sunny spells. Feels cool, though, in the breeze, but again, the winds nothing like as strong as they were yesterday. As we go through the evening and overnight, a few more showers will drift across the Highlands. We'll see some filtering down across into northern England and Wales. And then that next weather system starts to arrive in the southwest, so more rain coming in here. And because the ground is saturated, that could cause some problems too. Bit of a chilly one over northern England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, some mist and fog likely, and some pockets of frost also possible. Temperatures holding up in the south because the next band of rain comes in. Again, nothing as heavy as from earlier in the week, but any extra rainfall could cause some issues. We have a Met Office yellow warning across parts of southern England, and the rain lingering across northern England through the afternoon. So quite a cool day here in the south. If it brightens up, we could get into the teens.
Hi then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and